Let's continue the conversation now, and to do so, we call on our political panel. First, Skyping in from Connecticut, the former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Betsy McCaughey, and joining us from Newsmax, New York, noted radio and TV commentator Ellis Henican. Thanks to you both for your time here on Newsmax Prime. We're going to go back to last night and the debate because Donald Trump had something very interesting to say on H-1B visas. Let's listen to him and then talk about it more.
Nobody knows the system better than me. I know the H-1B, I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me. I'm a businessman. These are laws, these are regulations, these are rules. We're allowed to do it. It's very, very hard for our companies in this country, to compete. So I will take advantage of it. They're the laws, but I'm the one that knows how to change it.
You know, very interesting hearing that. And last night during our post-debate coverage, Betsy McCaughey of The Federalist was here. And she said after hearing that statement by Donald Trump that he kind of fits into the role of, believe it or not, a computer hacker. Listen to this.
He's really like the hacker that companies hire. He really knows everything, and he just says he's going to use it to actually turn back on the system. And so people just believe him, and they say, you've had experience, you know what you're doing, and they're rallying to him because they trust him. Even though he has played the game, they think he knows it well enough to turn the tables on everyone. So they trust him, and he stayed consistent in his message. He stayed consistent in his message tonight, and that really goes a long way with voters.
Betsy McCaughey, it's an interesting take from D.C. that Donald knows the system and thereby can be a true reformer. Your take?
Well, that's right. And he's made that same argument in many areas, whether it's campaign contributions or H-1B visas or the trade laws in general or tax reform or the bankruptcy laws. And the fact is, it is very compelling. It is very convincing because most of the people up there on the stage have never been in business. Some of them have never hired anybody, never really made a payroll. And now you're hearing from someone who has done all of those things and says, I can fix this system. It's very convincing.
Ellis, to you, you know, in the old days, we would talk about inoculation on certain issues, those of us serving in public office or running for public office. But to take up the mantle of reform saying, hey, I used to do this and I know it's wrong, but I know how to fix it, that is somewhat of a unique approach, is it not?
He didn't say it was
They call
wrong.
that the last They call that, to Betsy, the last refuge of the scoundrel, when you got nothing else. And in fact, maybe we should extend it. I'll do you one better. Let's put a drug dealer in charge of the war on drugs, an embezzler at the Federal Reserve. Maybe a bank robber could handle the Senate Banking Committee. We could just go the whole way, couldn't we? Why stop there?
This is completely different because the things he was doing were not against.
Oh, yeah.
Well, fair enough. Yes, you're right, Betsy. He didn't say they were wrong. He said they were legal, but it's something that needs to be stopped. But Ellis, I mean,
it was horrible, and he did it.
As delicious as your approach is for those on the left, I think it misses the bigger point that it scores points with voters, and it's worked very well for Donald. Last 15 seconds in this segment to you, Ellis.
Well,
yeah,
you know what?
Ellis.
He's got an audience for it. He's got an audience for it. There is no denying that. I think he's going to be Betsy's nominee, and I look forward to running against him in November.
Well, I tell you what, guys, stick around. We've got more discussion. And speaking of audiences, we hope you will be in the audience tomorrow, as we'll be on the air live tomorrow morning from Miami, Battleground, Florida. A 3-hour special starts at 8 a.m. Join us.
And as far as Florida is concerned, look, we feel good. We're making progress. We have real momentum here now. And I think there's a growing realization in Florida among supporters of both John Kasich and Ted Cruz that they can't win in Florida. John Kasich and Ted Cruz are barely even campaigning here. And so a vote for them is a vote for Donald Trump. And I think as more voters decide that, you're going to see a lot of people coming our way here down the stretch.
Marco Rubio earlier today on CBS This Morning trying to stay optimistic as more and more polls show that Donald Trump is leading Senator Rubio in his home state of Florida. Polls I've seen in Florida are, well, kind of all over the place. The closest margin I see has Trump ahead of Rubio by 6 points, but more often you see margins of close to 20 points. Donald Trump with a comfortable lead, and overall, Real Clear Politics reports in an average of polling that Trump is ahead in the Sunshine State by over 14 points. More fodder for discussion with our political panel. Back with us now, the former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Betsy McCaughey, and also with us, Ellis Henican, noted radio and TV commentator. Thanks for sticking around. Betsy, Marco is very telegenic, a pretty good debate performance last night, but can he make up the ground and come from behind to win his home state?
No, he can't, and the fact is that already nationally, Republicans are in a two-man race. We're trumping and cruising. It's either going to be Trump or Cruz. It looks like it will be Trump, but Cruz still has momentum. Marco Rubio can't win.
It is interesting because that assessment is shared by people who know Rubio pretty well. For example, Ellis, Al Cardenas, the former head of the Florida GOP and the former chairman of the American Conservative Union, says for all intents and purposes, Rubio is finished in the state of Florida. Do you think this finishes off his political career?
Probably, yeah. You know, it's funny because on paper, he's the perfect candidate, right? He's good looking, he's young, he's Latino, he's articulate, he's got a certain charm about him. But man, you put him out on the campaign trail and he just, I don't want to use a bad word, but he's not very effective.
Well, what killed him, I think, is the Gang of Eight. Once he signed up for amnesty, he was done with the base. Let's go to another young senator, Ted Cruz, who currently graces the cover of National Review following that publication's announcing its endorsement of Senator Cruz today. We should also note that yesterday, Ted picked up the support of his Senate colleague, Mike Lee. Betsy, you're already calling it trumping, or let's see, trumping and cruising? Is that the term you're using? I guess
that's right. America's trumping and cruising. It's a choice between the two. And Mike Lee's endorsement, by the way, is very important. He's highly regarded, especially among conservatives in the Senate. And he, like Ted Cruz, is very serious about the Constitution. And so this is a very meaningful endorsement.
It is interesting, Ellis.
Don't forget, Trump picked up an extremely meaningful endorsement today, too, with Ben Carson.
Right, as we talked about earlier in the program with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. But Ellis, it's always interesting to get a liberal's point of view about the conservative movement. And there you have National Review that devoted an entire issue to trying to stop Donald Trump. Today, finally signing up on the Ted Cruz team. You take a look at some head-to-head races, and at least on paper, it would be Cruz over Trump, anywhere from 10 to 14 points. And yet people say Cruz is unelectable if it comes to November against someone like Hillary. Your take on Ted Cruz and his chances?
Oh, he's way over on the edge. I mean, it's hard to imagine a lot of Democrats flocking to him, or very many independents and moderates. The Lee thing is interesting because finally someone else in the Senate has come around to embrace the most loathed man in the Senate. Most of his colleagues. What was that horrible thing Lindsey Graham said, that if he'd been shot in the floor, there'd be no witnesses? I mean, he's not very beloved by his colleagues now, is he?
Well, speaking of Lindsey Graham, Betsy, I guess it was last week on CBS This Morning that Senator Graham was engaged in ruminations that seemed to be the sole province of Lindsey in public, and pondering all this, and he said, to paraphrase, well, despite making a joke about Senator Cruz, we might have to get behind him. Do you think the Lindsey Grahams of this world are going to get behind Ted Cruz?
Well, I tell you, Lindsey Graham is the least committed type of Republican I know. He's already announced that anyone Hillary Clinton proposes or nominates for the Supreme Court will get his vote, provided the nominee is qualified. So Lindsey Graham doesn't represent the commitment of most Republicans to constitutional conservatism. I wouldn't use him as a litmus test for anything.
Well, let me ask Ellis, and Ellis, you must just find this delicious when you get to kind of dissect the Republicans and the intra-party squabbles that go on. But you've got Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and some others in the Senate who make very clear their antipathy toward Ted Cruz, yet in the broad scheme of things, you were saying, gee, where are all of Cruz's supporters? He doesn't need them in the Senate. He needs them among voters. So can Cruz still prevail in this race for the Republican nomination? 20 seconds, Ellis.
Sure he can. I mean, listen, politics, and you remember this, JD, is filled with people holding their nose and voting for someone they hate because they don't hate that person as much as they hate the other side. There's going to be plenty of that in the next few weeks. What will be interesting is playing back the earlier sound bites of all the insults and saying, well, wait a second. 2 weeks ago, you were calling this guy the scum of the earth, and now you say he should be president? Which time were you telling the truth?
Well, I would just simply point back. I would simply ask you to go back to 1980, take a look at George Herbert Walker Bush, and the term voodoo economics as it applied to Ronald Reagan.
There you go.
That worked out.
There you
Ellis
go.
Henican, Betsy
There you
McCaughey,
go.
thanks very much for your time. Up next, Pete Hoekstra.